Welcome back. Well, it's time to bring back our Tuesday trio of wonderful MPs representing the three main parties in Parliament. You might remember them from last June. Marco Mendicino is a Toronto Liberal, Karen Vecchio is a Conservative from London, Ontario, and Nikki Ashton, a Northern Manitoba New Democrat. Welcome back.
Good to be back.
You all look very rested. That's good to go. Well, of course, these lovely little scandals come along, and one of them is a relocation cost for the Prime Minister's staff. Turns out that people in the PMO billed up to, well, in one case, $126,000, in another case, $80,000, just to move from wherever to Ottawa. You were raising a bit of a hullabaloo in the House about this, Karen. Why? What's the big deal?
Well, you know, first of all, this is Canadian taxpayers' money, hard-earned money. And today, when I got this information in, we see $1.1 million spent of taxpayers' money on these relocations. There's not a lot of description why, but we're talking about the exempt staff. And this is an extreme amount that they are spending, and we continue to see more spending. We've seen it all summer long. And now this report, I'm happy to share it with you.
Sure you are.
I went through it all and marked anyone over 100,000, and there's many people that are over $100,000 that for relocation expenses.
But they could be moving from Nunavut for all I know.
But maybe if I understand those expenses as well, moving from Nunavut, maybe they're selling their house, and I recognize sometimes there's lawyer fees incurred. But you know, I moved here, and many of us MPs moved here, and I can tell you I did a heck of a lot less than even $5,000, let alone $126,000.
Nikki, you live in a fairly remote part of Canada. Does this sound reasonable to you, particularly if it's staff moving in from remote parts of Canada?
Well, it sounds like a culture of entitlement that is alive and well in the Liberal Party. I mean, the last few weeks have been a difficult. It's been a difficult summer for a lot of Canadians. A lot of Canadians have lost their job. In fact, a lot of Canadians where I come from have lost their jobs. So to hear this kind of money getting thrown around for something that a lot of Canadians have to do, move to get a job, is simply unacceptable. And I think this is possibly a sign of things to come unless the cabinet, unless the government gets it under control.
Yeah, Marco, I mean, $126,000, and it's segregated as strictly moving costs. This isn't real estate or anything else. This is moving costs. $127,000. That does seem like, I don't know what you're moving, a fleet of grand pianos and a whole bunch of cars? What?
Well, as your viewers know, there was a change in government, and there was quite a big swing. We went from 34 members of Parliament to 183 at the time, and that also includes having to staff those members of Parliament so that we can get back to work for Canadians. Look, I think we all agree that we have to respect the taxpayer's dollar. And we are raising the bar on openness and transparency, and I'm glad that Karen has taken an opportunity to read the report. It should be dissected, but let he who casts the first stone. Canadians don't have to look too far into the rear view mirror to see some real waste, whether it was $750 million on ads or other expenditures which were criticized. So we all want to be accountable to Canadians, and we are, but we also want to get down to work. I think Nikki mentioned, you know, how people are struggling. We know that the economy is very fragile. That's why we gave 9 million Canadians a tax break, and why we introduced the Canada Child Benefit Plan. That's starting to have a net benefit effect. That's what's going to help Canadians. That's what Canadians asked us to do and to deliver, and that's what we're doing.
Focus on the issue there, Marco.
Maybe I can give this to you, Marco.
There's a few tabs here that say, is the yellow $100,000 enough or what?
And then I'm really proud. There are some ministers that spent nothing. Scott Bryson, I can name him. McCulley. So there are some people.
Well,
but when
in
we're
fairness,
talking,
though, sorry, just to clarify, Minister Bryson is an incumbent, and so he wouldn't have to relocate. But there are many other members who are serving their first term, and these are hardworking, dedicated, passionate people who needed to relocate, not just themselves, but also their families. And so, yes, of course, we want to be open and transparent about that. And I think that this is a higher bar than than many Canadians saw in the last administration.
I want to move along because I don't think we're going to go anywhere with this one. This China deal, I find this interesting because last month, and I checked it and it's true, John McCallum did say we shouldn't do a deal with extradition with China because the people who are the fugitives that go back could face uncertain justice. Nikki, you defend a lot of cases like this yourself in the House of Commons. I've heard you before. What's bothering you about this move by the government to set up this treaty so quickly around the Kevin Garrett deportation?
Well, it is disturbing. I mean, we know that China does not have a good record when it comes to human rights, whether it's the respect for the rule of law. We know that torture is something that is done. We know that Canada, the Department of Justice, has recommended time and time again that we do not take the step that unfortunately the government is taking today. And I think this flies in the face of Prime Minister Trudeau's message around the world that he's a great defender of human rights, because this is really at the crux of it. I mean, this is where bad things happen to people, and this is a way for Canada to show leadership. And unfortunately, in this case, not only are we not showing leadership, we're going in the opposite direction.
All right, I'll get Marco to respond to this, and then I'm sure Karen might have a thought or two.
Well, look, China is, a real player on the global stage. Nobody's going to seriously dispute that. They have a massive population. We need a stronger, more stable relationship with China. The way that you do that is by opening and enhancing, I beg your pardon, the dialogue. And so we have done that. The Prime Minister announced a couple of days ago that we would be engaging in a high-level dialogue with China on things like national security, on cybersecurity, on things like rule of law, which hopefully throughout the course of time will lead to progress on things like extradition. And just to respond directly to Nikki's concerns, the way extradition,
not just my concerns.
Not just your concerns,
No,
to be
are.
fair, but the way that extradition processes work is, first the courts will screen whether or not there is sufficient evidence on which somebody might be convicted, assuming all facts are true, in the other country, in the requesting country, based on an offense, based on conduct which would be an offense here in Canada. It is then up to the minister to make a decision on whether or not to surrender that individual. Before they make that decision, they can and do seek assurances that the death penalty will not be used, or that an individual's charter rights will not be infringed. And that is certainly what we would expect the convention and the tradition will be once we finalize the extradition with China.
So as long as those safeguards are in place, Karen, what's the problem?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say it is great, and I think all Canadians are happy that Kevin Garrett is home, and he's safe and he's home, and that's fantastic. But at the same time, we have an issue with Minister McCollum saying just last month that we are not, the extradition when it comes to this is not going to happen. 3 weeks later, totally happened. What is the issue is that we do see human rights violations happen all the time in China. If we are to release people from Canada back to China, what is going to happen to those people? And we do have to make sure that we are loud and clear that human rights those rights of those humans cannot be violated. So.
I couldn't agree with you more. And just on that point, on the logic that I'm hearing from the opposition, we should cancel the extradition treaty that we have with the United States because they have the death penalty. Of course, we're not going to do that, simply because one other country has a justice system which may enforce its rule of law differently. This is all about strengthening the friendship and the relationship that we have with China. We want to deepen our trade. There is a lot there that I think that can be leveraged in the long run, and this is one way in which we can do that.
Nikki, I want to get your thoughts quickly on this Defense Committee report. It looks like the Trudeau majority imprinted their feelings on this. They want a quick purchase of a jet which leads to the Super Hornets and away from the F-35. Mind you, James Bazan, a Conservative MP, says quicker the better, so he kind of sides with it. Do you feel there's some funny business being played with this committee report? Because the opposition doesn't sound like it was consulted on it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's a big part of it. But I think we're seeing a bit of a pattern here is what we're seeing from the government in terms of action certainly doesn't fit what we heard in terms of rhetoric, whether it was in the election, whether it was prior to the election, a real interest in transparency when it came to this exact issue. And now we flip back, right? So not real change, unlike what the slogan we were told to believe in last election, and it is a troubling trend, certainly in the context of a purchase as important as this one. There ought to be transparency. It should not be sole source, and unfortunately, this is where we're seeing the government, the direction the government is taking, and once again, not giving the opportunity for opposition to be part of engaging in a proper process, in applying scrutiny, and that's what Canadians would expect from their parliamentarians. But more than anything, again, action not matching the words.
Erin, what are you thinking?
Absolutely right. What we see is we've had a number of consultations. Consultations are important when we want to hear back from the public. An important thing to know, though, is that there has been reports and all of these studies done over a number of years. So the information is sitting there for the government to help them make a decision. I am urging them, as James Bazan in that report, in all fairness, he quoted that 6 months ago, so it's not that 1 year, but it's 18 months. In all fairness, they need to open and have a fair and competitive way of getting these jets so that in 2025 we're able to get the jets back up.
Just to be fair, I once got a hold of a document from the Conservatives that showed how they could manipulate committees to get their way. If this is being done by the Liberals, they've learned this learned behavior.
Well, actually, no. I think you're quite correct to bring up the point about the independence of committees, and this is a report that will emanate from the Committee on National Defense. And if anything, again, we've raised the bar of independence and transparency and accountability. Parliamentary secretaries used to sit on the committees, standing committees. You'll remember that, Don. They were essentially co-piloting with the chair. Now, for your viewers, committees are meant to be independent from government. They are there to study legislation as well as to provide recommendations to government on things like the procurement process. Again, nobody disputes that there is a capability gap. There is no more important objective for Canada or the federal government than to protect its borders, and we are all committed to finding the right asset and plane, and we will do that.
All right, we're out of time, but quickly, you're not declaring your leadership bid yet?
Today, right now?
Right now,
I used to,
still thinking about it. This is a big decision.
Nikki, for your edification, last session, Don did try to get it out of Nathan every now and then. So way to continue the tradition.
Not alone.
All right, well, we'll look forward to hearing from you someday soon on that, Nikki. All right, it's time for a break.